Success can often be a mirage, disappearing just as you think you've finally reached it. We tell the stories of those who chase the dream, only to find a much different reality waiting for them. Subscribe today and explore the truth behind the illusions of modern life.
The day my daughter-in-law looked me in the eye and said, "We need somewhere to stay," I smiled. And I said, "Of course." What she didn't know, what neither of them knew, was that I had been waiting for exactly this moment for 10 years. But let me start from the beginning. My name is Dorothy, and I am 67 years old. I spent 31 years married to the most patient, generous man I have ever known. My husband Raymond was a quiet man, the kind who fixed the neighbor's fence without being asked, who remembered every birthday, who always knew when to speak and when to simply sit beside you. We built everything together. A small house in Columbus, Ohio that we turned into a home, a modest savings account that we grew carefully year by year. 2 children, my son Marcus and my daughter Patrice. Raymond passed away 8 years ago from a heart attack. He was at his woodworking table in the garage, doing what he loved, and he was gone before the ambulance arrived. I will never forget walking into that garage. I will never forget the smell of sawdust and the silence. I grieved. Lord, I grieved, but I got back up. That is what women like me do. What I did not expect was what came next. My son Marcus had been married to his wife Celeste for 3 years by the time Raymond died. I had tried, truly tried, to have a relationship with her. I brought food when they moved into their apartment. I babysat when they needed time alone. I stayed quiet when she criticized how I cooked, how I dressed, how I spoke. I told myself she was young. I told myself she would soften. She did not soften. 2 months after Raymond's funeral, Marcus sat down across from me at my kitchen table, the same table where I had fed him breakfast for 18 years, and told me that I was the reason his father was dead. He said I had put too much pressure on Raymond, that I had stressed him out for years, that my controlling nature had worn his heart down. I sat there and I listened to my son say these words to me, and I remember thinking, clearly and quietly, he did not come up with this on his own. Within a week, Celeste had called my daughter Patrice and told her the same story. She added details I will not repeat, details that were not true, and Patrice, to her credit, called me immediately. But Marcus, my firstborn, my boy who used to fall asleep on my chest, stopped returning my calls. Then he blocked my number. Then he sent me a letter, typed informal, telling me that until I acknowledged the damage I had caused, I was not welcome at their home, their events, or in their lives. I held that letter for a long time. Then I folded it, put it in the drawer by the stove, and I went back to living. What else was I going to do? I sold the house in Columbus. It was too large for one person, and every corner of it reminded me of Raymond in ways that were beautiful and unbearable at the same time. I moved to a smaller city in Tennessee, Murfreesboro, where Patrice lived with her husband and my 2 grandchildren. I found a part-time position at a local nonprofit. I made friends. I joined a garden club, which sounds small but was not small at all. I planted things. I watched them grow. I did not hear from Marcus for 10 years. Not a word. Not on my birthday. Not at Christmas. Not when Patrice's youngest was born. Not when I had a minor surgery on my knee and spent 3 days alone in a recovery room. 10 years. I want you to understand what 10 years of silence from your child feels like. It is not traumatic, not at first. It begins as a kind of waiting. You check your phone in the morning before you are fully awake. You notice every unknown number. You write letters you do not send. You dream about him as a little boy and wake up already missing him before you remember why. And then slowly, the waiting becomes something else. It becomes a kind of rearranging. You learn to hold the space where he used to be without falling into it. You do not stop loving him. You simply learn to carry it differently. By the time Marcus and Celeste showed up at my front door, I had been carrying it for 10 years. It was a Tuesday afternoon in October. I remember because I had just come in from the garden and my hands were still dirty. I heard the knock, opened the door, and there he was. My son. 51 years old now, heavier, tired-looking, with gray at his temples that stopped my breath for just a moment. And Celeste behind him, thinner than I remembered, eyes moving around my porch the way eyes do when they are calculating. Marcus said, "Mom." Just that. Just Mom. Like 10 years was a weekend. I looked at him. I looked at her. And I said, "Come in." Patrice called me that evening, after they had left. I had given them coffee and sent them home with a bag of tomatoes from the garden. I don't know why, force of habit, and she said, "Dorothy, please tell me you are not going to let them walk back in like nothing happened." I told her I needed to think. What I did not tell Patrice, what I did not tell anyone yet, was that 3 weeks before Marcus knocked on my door, I had received a phone call from a woman named Gloria, who identified herself as a former co-worker of Celeste's. Gloria said she had been holding on to something for a long time and could not hold it anymore. She said that 5 years ago Celeste had confided in her about a plan that involved Marcus's inheritance, the money Raymond had left, which was tied up in a small piece of land outside Columbus, and getting me to sign it over willingly or through legal pressure. Gloria said she had not come forward sooner because she was afraid of Celeste. She said Celeste had a way of making things very uncomfortable for people who crossed her. I thanked Gloria. I wrote everything down, word by word, the way Raymond always told me to document important things. And then I called a woman I had met to the garden club. Her name is Frances, and she had spent 20 years as a paralegal before she retired. And I asked her who she trusted. She gave me a name. His name was Mr. Holloway, and he was a property attorney in Nashville. I drove to his office the following week. I sat across from a man who reminded me of Raymond, careful, unhurried, precise, and I told him everything. The inheritance, the land, the 10 years of silence. Gloria's phone call, Celeste's eyes on my porch, moving and calculating. Mr. Holloway listened. Then he said, "Mrs. Dorothy, do not sign anything, and if they ask you to, call me first." Then he helped me do something else, something I will tell you about shortly. So when Marcus came back, I was not unprepared. I was simply waiting to understand what form it would take. It took about 2 weeks to take shape. Marcus began calling more often. He came by twice without Celeste, and on those visits he was the son I remembered. Quieter, more careful with me, almost ashamed. He helped me move a bookcase. He ate dinner at my table. He asked about Patrice's kids by name. I watched him, and I thought, some of this is real. Some of this is my boy. And some of this is a door being opened that someone else wants to walk through. The third visit, Celeste came. She sat in my living room, and she was charming in the way that people are charming when they want something. She asked about my garden. She complimented the house. And then, gently, the way you lay something down so no one hears it land. She said that things had been difficult lately, that Marcus's contracting business had slowed, that their lease was ending at the end of the month. She looked at me with soft eyes and said, "We were hoping, just temporarily, that we might be able to stay here. Just until Marcus gets a new contract, 2 months at most." I looked at my son. He looked at the floor. I said, "Let me think about it." That night, I called Mr. Holloway. He was not surprised. He told me that this was consistent with what we had anticipated. He reminded me of what we had already set in motion, and he gave me instructions very clear for what to do next. What Mr. Holloway had helped me do in the weeks before Marcus reappeared was this. I had transferred the title of the Tennessee property into a legal trust, structured in a way that required multiple co-signatories to make any changes. The land in Columbus, Raymond's land, the land Celeste wanted, had been placed in a separate protected instrument. I could not be pressured into signing it over, because legally, my signature alone was no longer sufficient to do so. Additionally, Mr. Prand, Holloway had connected me with a private investigator named James, who had spent 2 weeks looking into Celeste's recent history before Marcus ever knocked on my door. James's report was sitting in a folder in the drawer by my stove, right next to the letter Marcus had sent me 10 years ago. What James found was this. Celeste had a civil judgment against her in Georgia from 4 years prior, related to a real estate transaction that a judge had called deceptive. The case had been settled quietly. There was also a restraining order, expired now but on record, filed by a woman in Alabama who had been Celeste's business partner. The woman's statement described a pattern of financial manipulation that was very specific and very familiar. Marcus did not know any of this. I was certain of that. My son was not a wicked man. He was a weak one. He was a man who had let the wrong voice become the loudest voice in his life. and he had been living inside her version of reality for so long that I do not think he knew anymore what was true. I told Marcus and Celeste they could stay. 2 months, I said. Guest room only. My house. My rules. Celeste smiled. I watched her smile and I thought of Raymond. I thought of him saying, in that quiet way of his, "Dorothy, you always could see around corners." They moved in on a Saturday. Within the first week, I noticed things. Small things, but I had been watching carefully. Celeste would offer to help with paperwork, bills mostly, and one she brought in the mail before I could get to it herself. She asked casually about the property taxes on the house. She mentioned, twice, that it was so smart to have everything organized and wondered if I had a will that was up to date. Marcus watched television and fixed things around the house and seemed, genuinely, to believe that this was simply a rough patch. I think he needed that to be true. On the 12th day, Celeste asked if we could sit down and talk about the Columbus property. She had printed out documents. She slid them across the kitchen table, the same table where I'd once listened to my son blame me for his father's death. And she explained that she had spoken to an attorney and that the most tax-efficient solution would be to liquidate the land now rather than waiting for it to pass through the estate. She said it very calmly, with a pen ready, and she pushed the papers toward me. I picked them up. I read them slowly, even though Mr. Holloway and I had already reviewed a version of them. Then I set them down. I said, "I'll need to review this with my attorney before I sign anything." Celeste's expression didn't change, but something behind her eyes did. She said, of course, that makes sense." I called Mr. Holloway that afternoon. He told me the documents were structured to give Celeste, through a company she had registered under a variation of Marcus's name, controlling interest in any proceeds from the sale of the land. Marcus would have received a portion. I would have received almost nothing, framed as a lifetime use agreement that sounded generous and was not. Mr. Holloway had already been in contact with the district attorney's office for 2 weeks, in consultation with what James the investigator had found. The Georgia judgment, the Alabama restraining order, the company registered in Marcus's name without his knowledge. James had confirmed that Marcus had not signed the registration documents. Celeste had done it herself. 2 days later, there was a knock at my front door. It was not the kind of knock you ignore. I opened it. There were 2 people there who were not my family. They asked for Celeste by name. They had paperwork of their own. I stood back. I let them in. What happened in the next hour is not something I will describe in detail, because some of it is still part of an ongoing legal matter, and because some of it I am still processing, if I am honest. But I will tell you that Celeste was escorted from my home. I will tell you that the company registered in Marcus's name was part of a larger pattern that the district attorney's office had been building a case around, with 2 other victims in 2 other states. And I will tell you that Marcus sat at my kitchen table after they took her out, and he did not speak for a very long time. When he finally did speak, he said, "Mom, I didn't know." I looked at my son. I thought about 10 years. I thought about the letter in my drawer. I thought about Raymond in the garage, surrounded by sawdust. And I thought about all the mornings I'd reached for my phone before I was fully awake, waiting for a call that never came. I said, "I know you didn't, Marcus." He put his face in his hands. He cried in a way I had not seen since he was a small boy. Not the polite crying of funerals, but something older and messier and more honest. He said he was sorry. He said it more than once, and not in the way people say it when they want something. He said it the way you say it when you have finally fully understood the weight of what you did. I did not tell him it was fine. It was not fine. 10 years is not fine. 3 days alone in a recovery room is not fine. 3 days alone in a recovery room is not fine. A letter typed informal from your own child is not fine. But I did reach over and put my hand on his arm, because he is my son, and because I am 67 years old and I have learned that there is a difference between forgiveness and foolishness, and that you can choose one without being required to surrender to the other. Marcus is not living with me anymore. He found a temporary place through a colleague from work, and he is in the process of disentangling his finances and his name from everything Celeste had built around him. That process is going to take time. It is going to be painful. He is working with an attorney of his own now, one Mr. Holloway recommended. We talk on the phone twice a week. He came for Sunday dinner last month, and he sat at my table and we talked about Raymond. about the woodworking table in the garage, about what it sounded like when he laughed. It was the first time Marcus and I had talked about his father like that, like we were both allowed to miss him, and I will not pretend it didn't cost me something to sit through it. But I sat through it, and so did he. Patrice came too that Sunday. She brought her youngest, who is 7, and spent the entire meal asking Marcus questions about trucks, with a seriousness that made all 3 of us laugh. Watching the son answer those questions, watching him be present, actually present, in a way Celeste's version of him never quite was, I felt something I had not let myself feel in a long time. Not relief exactly. Something quieter, something more like the end of a very long wait. Frances from the garden club called me the week after everything happened, and she said, "Dorothy, how are you holding up?" I said, "I'm planting garlic this week. It needs 6 weeks of cold before it comes up in the spring." She laughed. She understood what I meant. Raymond used to say that the hardest thing in the world is to love someone who is causing you harm without losing yourself in the process. He was talking about his own father when he said it. A man who drank and who took it out on the people nearest to him. Raymond had loved that man and set a boundary around that love at the same time, and he had made peace with holding both things at once. I understand that better now than I did when he said it. I am not naive about Marcus. I love him. I am glad he is back in my life. I am glad he is back in my life. I am also watching. I am watching how he handles difficulty without someone telling him how to handle it. I am watching whether he shows up when showing up is inconvenient. I am watching who he is becoming without her voice in his ear. So far, I am cautiously hopeful. The Columbus land is still in the trust. It will stay there. Whatever happens to it after I am gone will be handled according to a plan that Raymond and I made together, updated now with Mr. Holloway's help, and no one will be liquidating it in a hurry. Raymond built that land into something worth keeping. I intend to honor that. The letter Marcus sent me 10 years ago is still in the drawer by the stove. I have thought about throwing it away more than once. I have not done it yet. Maybe I will. Maybe I will let Marcus read it someday when we are both ready for that conversation. Or maybe I will just leave it there, a record of what we almost lost. A reminder for when the days feel ordinary and the phone calls feel easy of what it costs to get here. I planted the garlic on a Wednesday morning, on my knees in the dirt with the sun not yet fully up, and I thought, this will not come up until March. I will have to trust the cold and the dark and the time. I will have to wait without being able to see anything happening. But it will come up. It always does. That is what I know at 67 that I did not know at 40. The waiting is not wasted. The quiet years. The hard years. The years when you are carrying something heavy with no one watching and no one helping. Those years are not lost. They are the ground. Everything that comes after grows out of them. I am Dorothy. I am 67 years old. I have outlasted more than people expected, and I intend to keep doing so. And if you are out there right now, carrying something heavy, waiting for something you cannot yet see, keep planting. It will come up.